Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I wanted to reach out to Zenon Radewych, who's a principal at WZMH Architects here in Toronto, about two different things that he's recently posted on that I found kind of interesting. The first is that he says that there's this new trend that's going on in building about data centers, and he's really excited about it. And it's fascinating to have such a smart guy get so excited about data centers, and I thought that would be interesting. And then his firm just won a big design award for something at 33 Bloor, which is right downtown Toronto, Yonge and Bloor area. And so I thought that would be interesting to hear about. So Zenon Radewych, welcome to our show.
Thank you very much.
So tell me a little bit about data centers. Why are you so excited about data centers?
Well, it's very interesting. These buildings have actually been around for a very long time. So, our firm started designing them, I would say, back in the late 70s, or I would say actually early 70s for a lot of banks and insurance companies. I joined a firm in the, called early mid 90s, and I did my first data center in the early 2000s. And I didn't realize that, there were so many data centers already in existence, across North America and the world, because, we've been using computers and generating data for a very long period of time. However, what happened, in the late 90s, early 2000s with, the internet and a lot of the existing data centers coming to what I call end of life, all of a sudden, a whole bunch of new data centers were being built all around the world, right? And when you think about the world that we live in, that we live, play, and work in, we're driving a lot of data. All of the handheld devices we have, the computers, laptops, the cars now, the smart cars, there's a lot of data being generated, and that data has to go somewhere. And sometimes I explain to clients that data centers are very much like office buildings. Instead of people, there's server cabinets, meaning there's office buildings everywhere. And so now you're going to start seeing data centers everywhere. However, having said that, they're not kind of built like, in a downtown core on the corners of major intersections. They're typically built, on the outskirts of cities, in the suburbs. There are some in the downtown core of cities, but a lot of them are actually built, more so called in the 905 areas for those that, live in the greater Toronto area, because they are big facilities and they require a lot of infrastructure in terms of cooling and stuff. So they're interesting buildings because they've been around for a long time, and they're only going to be around for a much, much longer time. And a lot of them are kind of, hidden facilities that are not really marked. You don't see a big name on the data center that says, we're a data center or the name of the company, because they hold and a lot of secure data, and they have to be secure facilities. So people drive by them all the time and don't realize that some of the buildings they're driving by, that white building that has very few windows happens to store a lot of data. And that building is connected with buildings all around the world as part of the cloud. So it's a very interesting building type in the sense that they're around. You don't really know about them, and they're growing because of the fact that the data that we're generating is only growing and growing and growing. So you're going to see, or at least hear, more and more about these facilities.
And so, what's the secret to building a good data center? Is it the cooling aspect that you talked about?
So it's a little bit about everything. So number one, it's very much about power capacity. They require a lot of power, meaning building a data center that could connect to a utility that has good power, lots of available power. That's very important. And then cooling is obviously a big issue, because these data centers currently, with the technology that's in place, generate a lot of heat, and you have to basically remove that heat and cool these facilities. So you have to really look at very efficient ways to cool them, because if you kind of just do whatever you wanted to do for cooling, it could be A, very expensive, but B, could also be very energy inefficient, right? So you want to look for solutions that cool these facilities in a very energy efficient way. Sometimes what we even call free cooling, right? And Canada is a great place, when you think about it, to build data centers, because we have cooler temperatures. So there are opportunities throughout the year where we could actually what we call utilize free cooling and really reduce the systems that generate that cooling in colder temperatures. So Canada is becoming a great place to actually build these facilities.
And so is the free cooling just from cold air, or are there ways to use lake water, or what is it that you're doing to provide that free cooling?
So the free cooling a lot has to do with the temperature difference in terms of, being colder outside versus inside. But to your point about the deep lake cooling, so we have been working with certain clients that want to tap into the unwave deep lake water cooling solution that exists in Toronto. But that typically means they have to kind of build their data centers in a downtown core, and some are, not necessarily right downtown core, but off, call to the left and right side, or the east and west side of the downtown core. So that is one option. But a lot of it is about the technology solutions that are used, in these data centers, where they use these heat wheels that basically, remove the heat from the space by basically bringing in outdoor cold air. It doesn't actually enter the data center, but basically removes the heat from the indoor facility. So a lot of solutions that evolve around the fact that we have these lower temperatures that makes it, call it a bit more called easier, more energy efficient to operate data centers in Canada.
And these data centers, do they have to be located close to a source of the data, or can you locate them in Greenland or in the Northwest Territories or something?
Well, they could, it depends on the type of data, in terms of, there are data centers that need to be close to, called stock exchanges, because of the data that's being driven to deal with the stock market in terms of financial exchanges and stuff. So there are data centers that want to be in close proximity to those exchanges, because speed is important to process the data very, very quickly. You can imagine stockbrokers that are doing trade and stuff, they always talk about the speed of doing that trade. So having, data centers that are in close proximity to where the trading is taking place, where the exchanges are, that's very important. For certain types of other data, it's not so important in terms of where they're located. So a lot of data center companies kind of build their data centers around that strategy. Some of the facilities need to be close to where the data is being created, but where speed is important to kind of go from point A to point B. And some of them simply build these facilities, where land is, more affordable, where there's good power, and there's also good fiber connectivity, but distance isn't necessarily an issue. And, because a lot of data centers now are actually backed up with other data centers. They, some of these technology companies will build 20, 30 data centers. They're all interconnected. So, your data might be in one of them one day and another facility another day, or backed up somewhere else. That's why they call it the cloud, right? The cloud is not the data in the air up in the sky. It's the data that is actually in physical buildings, located throughout the world, right? In called warehouse type buildings.
We're chatting tonight with Zenon Radewych. He's a principal with WZMH Architects here in Toronto about data centers, which is a topic that I didn't think anyone would get so excited about. But Zenon is obviously extremely interested in this topic. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Zenon in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Zenon Radewych, who is a principal with WZMH Architects here in Toronto. He has been talking to us about data centers. Zenon, maybe I could ask you a couple more questions about data centers. So, they obviously must need a lot of power. Is it best to locate them close to a source of the power, like near a nuclear power station or a hydro dam or something like that?
Not necessarily. In fact, locating close to places like that could actually be a bigger risk, because you can imagine if something happened at a nuclear power plant or the dam failed, for example, then that data center would actually go down. So it's not necessarily being located close to where the power is being generated, but being close to, transformer stations that have available power and reliable power that, is not going down all of the time. So that's more important. So whenever we look at actual sites for data centers, the first thing we look at is, what is the power availability to the site? Do we have to contact the local utilities and do, major upgrades? Will it take 1 or 2 years, or can we get it done in 6 months? So it's more about, the grid itself, how reliable the grid is, the transformation stations, and the available power they have to kind of connect to the data center. But one of the things that's important to note too is a lot of data centers now are being built in more urban, dense environments, and they call it the edge data centers. And these are very small, I call them like boutique data centers. They're literally 1/50th the size of some of these very large cloud data centers. They could be couple thousand square feet. And their sole purpose is really to kind of deal with, data that's being driven in close proximity to those facilities, such as the data that's being driven by autonomous vehicles or smart vehicles, the 5G network. So you're going to start to see and hear about these edge data centers being built literally like everywhere in these dense urban environments and dense city cores, maybe taking the second floor, a portion of the second floor of an office building, or in a condo development, for example, would be a good location where there's a lot of people around some of these large master plan communities. These edge facilities are going to start popping up. They already are, you're starting to see them, but you'll see more and more of them as we start moving towards this, world where we're all driving smart cars, autonomous vehicles, 5G.
Why is it that these data centers, these edge data centers, have to be so close to the autonomous vehicles?
Because they're generating a lot of data that can't be stored in those vehicles that have to go to basically, a data center via, Wi-Fi connections and things like that. So it's in that case, it's all about, the components that's driving the data, and you want to be in close proximity to what's driving that data, capturing it, storing it, processing it, etc. So that's the real reason why you need to be kind of very. Is
it because the data has to go and then come back again to the car?
Yeah, to come back to the car, or simply go to some other place, to go maybe to the cloud data center, to the bigger data center. But it's really about capturing all that data that's being generated from those devices that generate a lot of data, such as the cars. They generate a ton of data in terms of how the cars are moving and driving on their own, things like that.
These big cloud data centers, you said, are massive. How massive?
They're big. Some of them are, in the order of, a football field size. That's what I'll tell a lot of clients. Or they're built as part of campuses where you'll see 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 of these facilities. A lot of these very large campuses are in the U.S. south of the border, where they'll build, a 100-acre site that'll have 5 or 6 of these data centers, and now they're building them multi-story. When I first started this business, the majority of the data centers that we were working on were 1-story. Now we're working on 2, 3-story data centers because land is at a premium, and again the data growth is just kind of going through the roof, and so these facilities are now going vertical instead of just large horizontal football field. They're maybe the same football field, but now going vertical in terms of double, triple story.
You said that data is growing like crazy. Can you give us any sense of it?
I'm not the best person to kind of ask that question, or to provide the answer. But there's a lot of good information on the internet when you kind of look at or type in how fast is data growing, and there are a lot of interesting facts out there. Years ago, I remember I was at a conference and somebody was talking about the handheld devices, about how many handheld devices exist currently on the planet, and how many will exist in the next 5 years. And it's literally going up into the billions and billions because a lot of people actually have multiple handheld devices. I mean, just think about yourself. You probably have a phone, you might have a tablet, maybe you have 2 phones, right? And if you're in a home with multiple family members, everybody might have a phone and a tablet. So the amount of devices that we have now, it's not just one device you have. You may have multiple devices, and now your car is another device. Your smart car, right? So when you kind of look at it from that perspective, you start to realize, wow, wait a minute, that this data is really growing because we're using so many different devices that are generating data or storing data or whatever it is, right? And all of that again has to go back somewhere. It's not being stored on your device. It's going back to the cloud, which is basically a data center.
So the statistics that I've got here from Forbes magazine is that from 2010 to 2020, the amount of data created, captured, copied, and consumed increased from 1.2 trillion gigabytes to 59 trillion gigabytes, a 5,000% growth in 10 years. And it would appear that there's no slowing down in that growth. And that in the next 3 years, there will be as much data created as in the last 30 years.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of growing like this. It's like a skyrocket growth in terms of the data that's being created, and I think that's why we are seeing a large amount of data center work. Our firms specifically, a lot of we're doing a lot of that work right now across Canada, some in the U.S., and internationally. It's just a big growing business.
But how we store data, I've got to believe, has been miniaturized to a certain extent, has it not? Like there's got to be more efficient storage of data today than there was in the past.
Well, I'm not a super expert on the storage of data itself. My expertise is more so in the actual building design and stuff. However, what I can say is that the servers that are basically storing the data, they're becoming called more efficient in terms of the chips and where the data is stored. And efficient meaning they're becoming smaller and smaller, but it means we're packing more and more. So as the technology becomes smaller and smaller to store the data, we actually put more of that technology into those same physical spaces. So now we're storing a lot more data, right? So that's one of the issues with these facilities that 20 years ago, the facility that you built, the footprint, you could probably store, I'm guessing 100 times more data in the same footprint today than what you built before. Before. So, and it's because the technology itself, is getting smaller and smaller. Just think about, the computers that you had, many years ago were bigger, clunkier, and now all of a sudden, the computer is 1/5 the size. I mean, it's the same thing like the phone. Your phone today is as powerful as some of the computers you had 20 years ago, but it's super small. Same thing happening with the on the data side. It's everything's getting smaller, but we're putting more and more in there, and because it becomes smaller and smaller, we could put more of those smaller devices in the same footprint, and all of a sudden now we have a lot more data in the same building. But to your point, even though we can maybe store data more efficiently, we are still as those stats you mentioned, we're producing way more data than ever before, and there's no end in sight. And I think the one specific sector, the autonomous vehicle sector, is going to be a huge data creator when you think about those smart cars and what they're going to have to capture in terms of data to operate on a day-to-day basis. That's going to generate a lot of data that maybe we haven't even yet realized how big it's going to be.
You talked about the challenge with cooling. What about making use of the heat? Are you doing things that you can take the heat and exchange it or take it to some other user that needs the heat?
Yeah, so we do look at that. I mean, not all of the heat has to escape the buildings. A lot of the heat is recirculated. It goes back into the cooling systems where there's heat exchangers to basically then remove the heat or lower the temperature and then basically cool the data center. So we do look for solutions like that. The one issue with a lot of the current data centers is that we build them, as I mentioned earlier, not so much in the dense urban environments or where people basically live. They're built in industrial parks, places like that, where that waste heat may not be necessary for the surrounding buildings. So if they, for example, were built in downtown cores where there were a number of residential buildings around them, there's a great opportunity there to actually take that waste heat and dump it back towards those buildings which need heat. I mean, there are a lot of buildings that we live, work, and play in today that don't actually need a lot of heat, including, for example, office buildings. Office buildings will even go into a cooling mode in the winter months because of the people that are in them, the computers that are in them, etc. So heating isn't usually a big issue for a lot of buildings other than residential buildings. And a lot of data centers are not actually built close to residential buildings. So that whole idea of maybe building in a mixed use community where there's a data center, there's some commercial space, there's residential space, then the opportunities to really kind of, make the whole community energy efficient makes a lot of sense, because you could draw a lot of heat from those data centers to heat those residential buildings.
Right. Do you need backup power generation?
All data centers basically have a lot of backup power generation. So they're very much designed so that, they will never go down. I mean, you could imagine if a data center went down, the world would stop, right? If there were problems. So they're very much designed with a lot of reliability, a lot of redundancy, a lot of facilities we work on will have 10, 15, 20, 30 diesel generators, and a certain amount are required to operate the facility when there's no utility power. But you then also add additional generators in case some of those generators don't perform well. The other ones will kick in. So there's redundancy built on top of redundancy in many cases.
Are these data centers owned by the end user, or are they typically owned by a third party entity that provides the data storage to, so for example, like a Rogers or a TELUS or a Bell, would they own the data centers themselves, or would they be leasing data center capacity from somebody? And is the owner of the servers inside the data center the owner of the building, or is there an owner of building that leases the inside to the owner of the servers?
So it's a real big mixed bag. So I would say if you're to kind of rewind and look, 30, 40 years ago, the data centers were very much purpose built, meaning a bank built their own data center, and operated their own data center. Same thing with an insurance company, and same thing with a lot of technology companies. But in today's world, because the whole data business is growing exponentially, there's a combination where you'll have technology companies that own and operate their own data centers, and will actually lease space in somebody else's facility, and basically then become a tenant there. And have that company actually operate the data center, and they simply are the tenant with their own server cabinets. And the same thing's happening on the government side. Years ago, we were doing data centers for different government agencies that they were basically designing it, building it, owning it themselves. Now they're looking at actually leasing space, because the data center business is and designing buildings data centers is very, very expensive. These are not cheap buildings. These are probably at the end of the most expensive buildings per square foot than any other building.
Why?
Because of the mechanical, electrical infrastructure, the electrical and mechanical systems that are in there are pretty robust. As I mentioned earlier, very reliable, a lot of redundancy built in. So these buildings are pushing $700 to $1,000 a square foot to build. They're not cheap buildings, right? And because again, you have servers in there. They have to be on 24/7, 365. They have to be operating when there's a hurricane outside or heavy winds or snow. You don't shut them down. So the buildings are built very robustly with a lot of critical components. So they're very expensive buildings. But just getting back to answer your question, a lot of those clients that were building many years ago on their own are now looking and saying, you know what, it's probably more cost effective for us to actually lease space in a data center that's actually owned and operated by some other company that specializes specifically and only in the data center business, right? Because even some of those technology companies, I don't want to mention them by name, but we know who they are. They're in different businesses. They're not only in the data center business, but there are companies out there that only specialize in the data center business, and they will build these campuses and data centers all around the world, and they have as tenants all of those technology companies that even own their own, but they lease space in them. And for the simple factor that those technology companies can't build their data centers fast enough on their own. So that's why they actually lease space in other facilities, or one of the reasons why they lease space in other facilities.
You talked right off the top of our show about these big buildings with no windows. The data centers, are they just boxes, or do you have to do something architecturally with them to make it conducive to being in a suburban or urban environment?
Yeah, so I mean, they are predominantly big boxes, but they do have people spaces. So there's an office component where people, work every single day. Customers that come by need to kind of sit in an office environment as well. So a small component is an office environment that has windows and looks like an office building. But to your point, because land is at a premium now, and cities are growing and growing and growing. Even building these things in non-urban environments, industrial parks, or close to urban environments requires that we design them in a way that respects the urban development that's happening around them. Meaning, a lot of cities now are really pushing for what we call higher architectural excellence in how they look. They can't be just simply blank concrete walls or whatever. So we do, spend a lot of time looking how we integrate these facilities into the landscape, into the surrounding, urban environment. How we address, people that are walking by on the sidewalk and see these facilities. How do we deal with things like that? So there is a higher design element to them now than ever before.
There's been, a lot of controversy about if you've got your data stored in the United States, then the United States security apparatus would have access to it, or if it's in China, the Chinese security agencies would have access to it. Is that another reason why Canada might be a prime place to, along with our cold weather, to put these data centers?
That might be part of it. I mean, I'm not sure how big that is, but I think one of the reasons why Canada is seen as a good location for data centers. I mean, number one, the U.S. to the south of us, which is probably has the most data centers over any nation in the world, and big population, big business. All the technology companies are there. We're close. We're their neighbor, and we have a lot of land available here. So it makes sense for us to be a good location for data centers. But also, there's a lot of other good things that are going for us in Canada. We have a pretty good infrastructure. Set up in terms of the utility grid, the fiber grid, all of those things, good highways, good airports for people to fly in and out very, very quickly. Good skilled labor to build these data centers. That's really important. So we really have a lot of the key components that make sense that drive the need to kind of have or that drive the need to kind of pick the location to build these data centers. And then we are a growing country. We are growing and growing and growing. So a lot of companies look at Canada as a place to invest in because of how we're growing and the data that's being generated here.
And so, given what you described of the need for dealing with the cooling, maybe using the heat for some other benefit, that you got to have this reliability and this, something that doesn't look just like a box, that's going to be respectful of the local environment and have the cities approve it, et cetera. Why would I hire you versus a regular architect? Because my sense is that, it's just a box. So tell me what the role of the architect is in these designing these data centers.
So that's a very good question. And the reason why I think we're being hired, and I think we're probably one of the only firms in Canada that are doing the majority of them, is because, we kind of think outside of the box when it comes to designing facilities. I mean, we clearly understand, form follows function, that it's very much about, how power flows into the building, how they're cooled. So one thing that we do right off the bat is we look at how to really drive efficiency in terms of laying out the facility, where the electrical systems go, where the cooling systems go, and really kind of reduce the length of piping, of conduit, of copper, to make the building more efficient and more cost effective. The second thing that we do very well is bring innovative ideas to the table in terms of, to your point about how to actually look at free cooling, how to kind of arrange the data center on the site to take advantage of prevailing winds, things like that. So we kind of look at it very seriously from the perspective of how can we actually make these facilities very energy efficient, and if we could make them energy efficient, that basically means reducing the operating costs, less reliability on the grid, things like that. So we don't look at them simply as four walls and a roof, a box. We look at these projects as an opportunity to really kind of raise the bar in terms of designing a building that really pushes the limits on energy efficiency and new innovative technology solutions.
We're chatting tonight with Zenon Radewych. He is an architect here in Toronto. We're talking about data centers so far. We're going to take a break for some messages, and we're going to come back and talk about a design award that his firm recently was the victor of, the winner of, at 33 Bloor. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Zenon Radewych. He's a principal with WZMH Architects here in Toronto. And Zenon, you posted recently that your firm won a big award, an architectural design award for 33 Bloor Street. Tell us why you won the award and what it was for, if you could.
So that was a great, I don't want to call it a little project, but it was a renovation project at the base of an existing 17-story office building on Bloor Street, just east of Yonge Street. And it's a very important project because of its location and access to the subway station, which is, I believe, the busiest subway interchange in Toronto in terms of Yonge Bloor. So a great project that our office did a few years ago. It was led by one of my partners, Moran Olsha, and a designer at the time, Andrea Tocchini. And the whole concept behind the project was kind of to create this lobby where we utilize the design of the walls and the ceiling system with this prefabricated modular fin system that became kind of like the signage and wayfinding solution to kind of lead you through the actual lobby and take you to the actual subway station. So it was a very smart solution that kind of utilized the form of the space, the form of the ceiling, to kind of provide the the pathway, call it, for people that enter the building, or if they're exiting the building, to kind of take them to the front door, or to call it the front door of the subway station. So a really cool project, and it's a project where, you know, designed from the beginning, we looked at everything in terms of lighting and the mechanical systems, how we integrated all of that into this cool ceiling system, so that everything is very nicely hidden and detailed, and again, really integrated in with these fins that provide this feature to kind of walk through the space.
Sounds exciting. And is your firm the winner of numerous different architectural design awards?
Yeah, we've won many. We always win awards. I mean, you know, every year. I mean, I don't know exactly how many, but we're always winning something in terms of, you know, whether it's for a new building, whether it's an environmental award in terms of energy efficiency or lighting or interior design. So we're always winning awards. You know, one thing that we've been doing a lot of, you know, which is happening in the downtown Toronto core, is the revitalization and refurbishment of office building lobbies. I mean, there are a lot of new buildings that have been built, you know, in the last 20 years. But think about it, there's a lot of buildings that were built in the last 50, 60 years that need to kind of compete with those new buildings. And so one of the first things that a lot of the landlords do is they look at the actual lobbies, you know, improve the lobbies of the spaces, because that is really the front door of that building. And so when they want to attract, you know, new tenants and bring people into those buildings, that's the first thing they kind of look at, is how to really improve that lobby and rejuvenate or revitalize the lobby. And so we're doing quite a bit of that. It's something that a lot of landlords are doing to the, you know, existing building stock, for those buildings that were built in the 70s, 80s, and even early 90s. They're going through this, you know, rehabilitation phase of fixing these spaces.
One of my favorite, I don't know if you call it a lobbies, but is Brookfield Place and the soaring,
Right.
You know, what do you call it? You know, the structure
Right.
of that atrium. Does that pay for a developer to have that kind of lobby, that kind of atrium with you know, huge soaring ceilings and glass roof to it, and does it take away from the density that you can build in the balance of the development?
Well, I mean, you know, my opinion is that it pays, because at the end of the day, it is your front door. And in the specific case of the facility you're talking about, is that space is a key, you know, pedestrian link that you know, goes east-west, but also connects to the path, and also provides, you know, access to a lot of the, you know, podium components of the office buildings that actually land on either side of basically that pathway, such as the banks, right? So these spaces, you know, become multi-purpose. It's not just about creating a lobby. It actually provides access from, you know, from one end of the facility to the other end, which, you know, neighbors two major streets, provides access to some really good retail spaces that are below and at that level. So I think, you know, looking at lobbies in that way, you know, really improve the value of the buildings. If you could get people to come into some of those spaces and then basically access retail, you know, or you know, go down to the pass system, you know, or even just become, you know, the new front door for the tenants that are in the building. A lot of these spaces now too are becoming multi-purpose, as I mentioned earlier, where you'll have lounge seating set up where maybe, you know, if you're a tenant in the building, you'll go down and meet somebody for coffee or have a small little informal meeting in a nice little lounge space that's built into the lobby or as part of the lobby. So, you know, it's not just, you know, a space where you enter and you walk to the elevator and go to your floor or down to the parking. There's spaces where you meet people, where there's retail, where you interact, you know, with small little informal meetings, different things like that. So they're very important spaces to buildings, and so I believe they pay for themselves.
I was told that they're very difficult to control from a heat and cooling standpoint, and that to clean is almost impossible.
Yeah, when you think about it,
clean the windows, the glass.
Yeah, so for those facilities that have, you know, the skylights and things that are very high up, if you kind of walk through them and look very closely, you'll see, you know, a contraption of window washing equipment that's, you know, on wheels and things and rails that's, you know, hung suspended way up in the air. So, you know, that's how they typically clean them. So you're right, it's not easy. There is a maintenance aspect to basically dealing with, you know, things like that. So that's looked at very carefully when we design a lot of these buildings, that owners need to kind of recognize and understand that these great, glass features come with a price in terms of cleaning them. But you're right also too on the heating side as well. These facilities, these lobbies have, multiple doors that are opening, closing all the time. How do you deal with the escaping, heat, especially in the winter time, or even in the summertime with the heat outside and cooling inside. So, that's where we introduce things like revolving doors more so often. A lot of the older buildings that don't have the revolving doors, we're adding revolving doors now, which really helps with all of that, improving the glass performance, changing the glass. So when we renovate these lobbies, we put new exterior components, we look at a higher performing glass. So the things that we can do to actually make these spaces called more energy efficient and feel so that when you're standing inside and you're near the front door and it's cold outside, you don't feel that cold draft coming inside anymore.
One of the things that I found really interesting about this 33 Bloor that you won the award for is a comment that the undulating ceiling arches provided a wayfinding system, that it was a natural wayfinding system. And these undulating features, I guess, were sort of the structures in the ceiling that become smaller and lower down. Tell me about that. Do you actually think that helps people figure out where they're going?
Yeah, I think 100% it does. I mean, that's kind of what I mentioned, at the beginning of the discussion on 33 Bloor, is that the ceiling design and even how it kind of wraps around the walls is very much about kind of creating this space that helps guide people through the space to go from, call it the front door of the building, to the lobby or to the subway. So it acts as a signage and wayfinding component. Right now, when you think about signage and wayfinding, you think about, letters and numbers printed on a wall with plaques with arrows. Well, in this case here, the way that the form is set up and the way the ceiling is set up, it very much guides you to kind of, flow through that space. And as you approach the subway side, the curves and those their composite panel clad members actually start kind of coming down in scale and kind of lead you to those entry points or exit points. So it's very much about a signage and wayfinding solution.
Your firm is interesting that you have on a fairly regular basis these charrettes that are intelligent and sustainable communities of the future. Outside of the box, charrettes with a focus on green technologies, wellness, quality of life, safety, and accessibility. Wow. Can you tell me anything about these charrettes?
Yeah, so actually, I started those I think it's been a year now, and it all started off with a student from Ryerson that came to us doing his master's degree in microgrids, and he asked if we could help him and be part of his thesis and developing his thesis. So we agreed, and to be honest with you, I didn't know much about microgrids. His background is mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, and so what I thought, the best way to kind of do this is we'll invite him to our office every single week, and I will invite engineers and other experts in this field, and all of us together will brainstorm and help this student, with their thesis. So that's kind of how it started. And after the first session, I learned a lot. I realized, wow, this was an amazing event. We had people calling in from Seattle, some of our called expert friends or consultants from Microsoft that called in, and realized that this is a great forum to kind of discuss and brainstorm ideas. And so basically we decided to keep doing this every single Thursday to not only assist the student, but then kind of table other ideas. And so it's grown from that, helping the student to basically now having these weekly workshops where we have anywhere from 10 to 30 people join. Anybody can join, anybody's welcome to join. And I always say there's no dumb ideas. We pick a topic, we announce a topic a couple of days before the session or the day of the session. And then basically, right now, a lot of it is through Teams in terms of it's video, it's a video meeting, but we'll put up like a sketch board on the screen and we'll sketch ideas and brainstorm. And it's really interesting how when we have these sessions, which are every Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern, when we have a topic, I usually find about 30 minutes into the charrette, we'll switch gears and start talking about something completely different, because that topic, that first initial topic, will basically get us thinking about something else. And all of a sudden, everybody's kind of thinking, and they say, well, how about this? How about that? And so we'll go from talking about batteries to talking about, how to deal with water flowing down a sewer in the same discussion, right? So they're really, really interesting charrettes. They're never boring. They're always exciting. Or if they are boring, just get ready, because usually within a few seconds, it'll just change. And all of a sudden, we'll be having this kind of crazy discussion on some very innovative ideas. So a lot of fun, and we're getting more and more people that are joining now every week, people that we don't know, that are hearing about them, that are coming on board. So a lot of fun. We're being asked if they could be recorded. One of the colleges asked if they could have their complete classroom listen in and join. So it's a lot of fun.
Fantastic. You say you started out talking about microgrids. What's a microgrid?
Well, a microgrid is, picture like a grid of wires, on poles, but that's not really what it is. But picture a grid of wires on poles surrounding a community of things from housing to office buildings to data centers. And all of these wires interconnect to all these buildings, but then interconnect to a common power source, like maybe a small little power plant, and maybe a battery storage system, and maybe a solar panel field close by. So, we generate green energy, we store it in the batteries, we have a common power plant, and we distribute that power amongst that grid to all the buildings. So they all share from the same basically grid, versus, called utility power, right? We can still have utility power, but it's the idea of basically tying into a grid that has really its own elements, like I mentioned, its own, power generation, its own green utility, its own storage systems. And when you do that, you really can start driving the idea of energy efficiency, and taking advantage of, who your neighbor is, a data center neighbor that might generate excess heat, to your point, and we'll take that heat, send it to the power plant, convert that heat into power. So things like that. So it really opens the door to really driving energy efficiency.
We're chatting tonight with Zenon Radewych, an architect in Toronto. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back with some concluding comments with Zenon in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting with Zenon Radewych. He's a principal at WZMH Architects here in Toronto. And Zenon, you're a very prolific poster on LinkedIn, and I love following you because you always are posting interesting articles and interesting things, either that you yourself have come up with and or that you're sharing articles that you find interesting written by other people. And one of the that you posted recently that created quite a back and forth controversy with some of the people that were commenting on your post was a statistic that said that workforce in downtown Toronto was still down 77%, and a question about whether downtown Toronto would come back. What's your sense of things? Is downtown Toronto going to come back, or are we all going to stay working at home?
No, it's definitely going to come back. I mean, I'm a big believer in work, not necessarily in the office, but basically work within a group of people, or with a group of people, work within a team. I think it's really important that we need to kind of understand that, everything that we have today, all of these great technologies that we use every day, for the last 20, 30, 40 years, they were developed very much, in collaborative team environments. They weren't developed by one person sitting in their basement, coming up with something. You can't come up with these great solutions on your own, and you have to really work in an environment where people are around you, where you can bounce off ideas. A few minutes ago, I talked about those charrettes that we're having. They're amazing, having them online. But I was thinking to myself, if we had that same charrette, that workshop, in a boardroom with those same, 10, 20, 30 people, the energy in there would be amazing. I think the ideas would be tenfold, because, people will have that much more opportunity to actually speak and show things. Online, it's a bit more difficult, right? So definitely Toronto's going to come back, but more importantly, if we want to really kind of keep moving forward and Canada, as a nation, to kind of drive innovation and new technologies, we have to get back to those types of environments where we work together in a team environment. So that will be a combination of downtown office space and suburban office space. It'll be all over the place, but we have to get back to a place where we could actually be working together. And the same thing with the schools. Students need to be in an environment where they could basically brainstorm, collaborate, bounce ideas off each other, and that's where they become really, really creative and come up with amazing ideas. So the same thing goes with the workforce. We're not robots. We don't sit and simply punch in numbers all day long. A lot of the businesses that are downtown are very much about being creative, come up with ideas and solving problems. So you have to be around people. Otherwise, if you don't, it's just going to take longer to get there. And if we don't, the competition, meaning other countries, are going to get there sooner and take it away from us. So we need to get back to that environment.
So there was a book written a decade or two ago called The World is Flat that argued that because of communications and travel and stuff like this, we could all live wherever we wanted, which is almost sort of what's happened during the last year and a half as people have moved to Collingwood and worked from home or boats or wherever they have been. And then Richard Florida came out with a book or an article that said the world's not flat, it's spiky. And a great book by a guy by the name of Edward Glazer talked about the triumph of the city. And, echoed a lot of the comments that you made, that collaboration is key and teamwork is key, and that working with other people's and ideas come from that kind of interaction. Where do you come out on that? You come out that we need to have cities, density, collaboration. Is that correct?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I could tell you just from my own experience, in the last, call it almost 2 years, the majority of the time we've been working from home. I spend a couple of days in the office every week, but, our R&D lab that we have at WZMH, which, specializes in smart building technologies and IoT things, in the last 2 years, if we were in the office, we probably would have produced triple, quadruple the amount that we've produced working from home, meaning, there's a lot of great ideas that we have that we want to get working on, but it's taking time to get the ones that are behind those ideas finished, because we just can't work at the same level of, speed, accuracy, collaboration, whatever you want to call it, when we're working independently. And so, to me, that was a proof that I realized, wait a minute, there's so many things I want to work on, but I just can't get them done because I'm not next to the people that we're working with. And when we try to do it online, over the phone, via Teams, yeah, it works, but it doesn't work at the same level, the same, momentum, the same speed. It drags, it's dragging. And I'm a bit frustrated with it because there's a lot of great ideas that we want to kind of get moving with. And we could have had on the table 6 months ago, and they're only going to come onto the table now because it's taking that long. So to me, that's a proof we got to be together.
Zenon Radewych, principal at WZMH Architects. I appreciate you joining us tonight and telling us about data centers, about soaring atriums and front doors to buildings and the design awards that your firm has received, and also about the importance of collaboration in cities. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's our show for tonight. Thanks for joining us. I'm on every night, Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca. And if you want to get a little bit closer to us, like Zenon is suggesting you need to do, you can always get my YouTube videos on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram, on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us. Good night, everybody.